Major James Oswago.
Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Karibu sana to Fixing the Nation.
Thank you.
This is where we podcast meets broadcasts. And we have these conversations of fixing the nation one at a time. Today, it's about the IEBC and just understanding management of an election. You sat at the helm of that. You managed the referendum of 2010. You managed the general election of 2013. And you faced several court cases thereafter, and they're still going on. Before we get there, good girl Jano will give you the day's quotes.
Right.
We call her Jano Wama quotes.
Today's quote, the spiritual leader and teacher known as Buddha, many centuries ago, he once said, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. That's what he said. We just like to engage our guests to find out, how do you translate that? How does it land with you? How do you translate that quote? Do you agree? Yeah.
I'm familiar with that. And agree in the sense that there is only one truth.
Yeah.
There is nothing like alternative truth. But if there is only one truth, the problem is arriving at that particular truth. There are many journeys to arrive at that. So in seeking the truth, the process is inexorable. And you have to look at it and find it. The truth will not come to you. You have to look for the truth. The point, the challenge is, when do you know when you have arrived at the truth? Because you may not be aware, or you may perceive that you have arrived at it, but it is hiding in plain sight. With the kidogo prudence, you find it.
That's interesting, that sometimes you don't know if you've arrived at the truth. I thought truth was undeniable. But is there also a time when the truth is, you know, not what you deem it to be? How do you guys process
Alternative
that?
truth, or
No, just
it's subjective.
it's a truth.
You
It's
may
the
think it's the truth, but is it the truth? Or you, because I think like what Oswago is saying, you are seeking the truth. How do you know when you've arrived at the truth?
Okay.
Or how do you know that where you've arrived and you call that the truth is actually the truth?
Okay.
Right?
All right. We'll put a pin on that and thread it throughout today's show. It's very interesting perspective.
It's a very interesting one. James, you are facing a case in court, and it's still going on. Right now, it's at the Court of Appeal. But there are very many people who today, if they had Chicken Gate, they'll be like, what's that? There was a case that was taken to court. There are 2 cases that were taken to court, looking at your tenure at the helm of the IEBC. One of them was an administrative one. Another one was this one, which was a criminal one on corruption. Let's start with the administrative one. What was it about?
All cases that go to Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission are criminal. They're economic crimes. But the question is, what was it? Was it, depending on the nature of the charge, it can be failing to comply with the procedures, it can be theft, it can be conferring value, it can be abuse of office. So you're asking me the one that is already concluded?
Yes.
The one that is already concluded was, the facts are that IEBC procured electronic voter identification devices, and there were 45,000. They were delivered at the warehouse. When you procure items through tender, you inform the tenderers where to deliver those goods. And the 34,000 computers were delivered at the IEBC warehouse in the industrial area. For one reason or the other, they were used in the election thereafter. Years later, it is alleged that they didn't go through one of the processes of accounting. That is, they were not subject to inspection and acceptance committee. There is a committee in procurement called Inspection and Acceptance. The committee is constituted by the CEO, and it does its work. Procedurally, when the goods are delivered at the warehouse, the people at the warehouse notify the committee, then the committee assembles it itself, and they do their work. In this particular instance, the allegation is that the Inspection and Acceptance Committee process didn't go through, and that the CEO is responsible. So we are contesting that in the sense that this happens nowhere in the world. There's nowhere in Kenya where a chief executive officer can know when goods procured and which have been delivered are inspected or not inspected, because there is a person to do that work. And if that judgment stands, and today as we are speaking, that is the law, because it is at the High Court. If that judgment stands, that means every other accounting officer of a public entity, anything else that is done by your subordinates, wrongfully done by your subordinates, you are criminally liable. If that stands.
Right.
If the CEO interferes with one way or the other, for example, if goods were delivered and you didn't form the inspection and acceptance committee, or goods are delivered and you interfere, that's a different issue. But if they're delivered and there was no inspection and acceptance, and yet you hold the CEO accountable, what it means is that from now onwards, all the actions or by subordinates, the CEO is held criminally liable.
Is
This is
responsible.
unsustainable.
Did you establish the committee?
Oh, yes. And they were called to give evidence. Hassan Abdallah was the chairman. Gabriel Mutunga was the secretary. They were called to the committee, and they came and they said they've been doing that for years, and they never informed the CEO. And I'm aware that the CEO is never involved.
Okay.
Even the CEO at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. At the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, they also have the same committee. And they have a CEO who is an accounting officer. If you call him here tomorrow and ask him if he would know if goods are delivered at his warehouse, he will tell you he can't know. They're charging me for something that even themselves, they cannot do.
They can do. But so far, the court has found that you are liable.
The magistrate said I was liable. Reason, ask straight question, get simple answers. Were goods delivered? Yes. Was there inspection and acceptance? The magistrate says no. If the answer is no, then somebody must be liable and culpable. And to the magistrate, that person who is culpable
Is the
CEO.
Right.
Now, is it criminal responsibility? Do you hold criminal responsibility? Because criminal responsibility is personal. It's not vicarious. It's not transferable.
That's a great question. Whether it's, whether you hold criminal responsibility or not, let's pause on that. But I do get where the magistrate is coming from, in a sense that someone does have to, be held accountable. And at the end of the day, the CEO is at the top of the food chain. So if there is someone to hold accountable, it's the person at the top of the food chain.
If we were discussing law at a public baraza, that is a very good position. But criminal responsibility has two elements in law. And maybe we don't want to go into those. But there is the mental element, that is called the mens rea, and there is the physical element that's called the actus reus. You can't do that for somebody else. It must be you.
You.
It must be you by design. So if somebody else does it, it is that individual. There must be somebody at IEBC. Not that there must be somebody at IEBC, and I think I'm allowed to say this. The person who was supposed to do these things at IEBC was the prosecution witness number 2, was called, and he said, yes, the goods were delivered. I've accounted for them. Yes, it was my job to call the Inspection and Acceptance Committee. I did not call the Inspection and Acceptance Committee because there was no time to call the Inspection and Acceptance Committee. I didn't tell the CEO. The person who was supposed to do it came to court and confessed and said all those. But still, they asked procedural issue. But was it done? No. Somebody must bear responsibility. That is what the High Court judge said. Whatever the case, somebody must bear responsibility. And who could this person be? They cast around and they said, must be the CEO.
That's case number 1. Case number 2 involves something that was called Chicken Gate. What was Chicken Gate about? What was the case about?
See, Latif, I'm pausing because I don't know.
What have you been charged with?
Now, Chicken Gate, as was reported in the media, let's start from there. As Chicken Gate was reported in the media, and it's very interesting because what I'm going to tell you is counter-narrative. Counter-narrative in the sense that it's something that we have not been hearing. Chicken Gate was reported in the papers to be, there was a company called Smith & Usman. Smith & Usman supplied voting material to that interim independent election commission you're talking about to do by election in a place called Sinyalu and Bomachoge. That is 2009. And the narrative is that the officials who were in that commission were corrupt. So they inflated the prices and inflated the quantities. And from the proceeds, they distributed amongst themselves. Also that when they went abroad, they were treated lavishly by the vendor. Another element of that was that this was a co-conspiracy between people in Kenya and people in Britain. But that the people in Britain, because their process is more efficient and more effective, they have done their investigations, and the culprits there were already investigated, taken to court, and jailed. So there were two elements. One, the thieves in Kenya have not gone to court.
Yep.
They are in court, but their case has not been concluded. Their counterparts in London are already jailed. So wherever you go, there is the issue of Chicken Gate. Now, I have read more headlines testing Chicken Gate more than any other multi-billion shilling contract I've heard about in this country. And just to give you, if you allow me, when we were going to the election in 2017, there was an editorial in one of the major newspapers, the legacy media. And the editorial was looking at what are those things that are likely to negatively impinge, to negatively compromise the 2017 election. And the editorial writer mentioned a number of them. One of those prominently mentioned was Chicken Gate. Now, hold that for a minute. A year and a half ago, I was watching news. This is to tell you how traumatizing it can be. And the reason why it should be, the public should know what it is. I was watching news, and I was one of the Citizen TV and primetime news. And out of nowhere, they say they're investigating why the resolution of Chicken Gate is taking so long. And they said part of the reason why the Chicken Gate case is taking so long is that James Oswago's daughter died. Which is true. I had a big daughter who died. So as I was watching the news, this hits me, and I wonder, but what has the death of my daughter to do with a trial that has taken 7 years? Now, my daughter died. It's a grisly road accident around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. She had become a Muslim. And then the following day, I came face to face with the reality that the consequences of her choices, her own free will, was that she would be buried according to the Islamic faith. And by the following day, 3 o'clock, and it was the first time and the last time I was in that kind of burial, she was buried. So between her death and the time she was buried was 2 days. So I asked myself, how does 2 days contribute to the delay in a 7-year-old trial? And it struck me that there is so much that needs to be dispelled and needs to be explained. So Chicken Gate is something to do with 2009. I joined IEBC in 2010, 4th of January 2010. In 2009, there were by-elections in Sinyalu and Bomachoge. You've already mentioned that Electoral Commission of Kenya was disbanded. When it was disbanded, a new one, which you've mentioned, the interim one, was formed. Around April 2009. When they arrived at Anniversary Towers, they found nobody because everybody had been sent home.
Who arrived at Anniversary Towers?
The new commissioners.
Okay.
The new commissioners, they have just been formed in April. They go to Anniversary Towers. They only found APs. Why? Because when the ECK was disbanded, everybody was sent home. From the chairman, commissioner, staff, kila mtu, sent home. So in order to work, they asked for secondment of staff from central government, and they were given second staff. Before they settled, they received what is called a wreath. A writ is both an instruction and
A declaration.
And a
of
declaration.
vacancy.
The speaker is telling you there is a vacancy in a particular constituency, but you must do that election in 90 days. Commissioners of IEBC would have been within their rights to say, we don't have staff, one. Number two, they would have within the right to say, to procure competitive tenders would normally takes between 3 to 5 months. So they would have said, we can't do it. But they chose to do something in the public interest with the staff they had and what have you. So what they did, they looked at the previous suppliers of ECK and they took the lowest one who had supplied for the election in 2007. That is the Smith and Usman.
Smith and Usman.
Yes.
Usman.
Yes.
UK based.
UK based.
Okay.
Smith and Usman was supplying ballot papers and other security materials in Africa to about almost 24 countries, not just Kenya. They were in Kenya, they were in Malawi, all over the whole place. Now, during this period, Smith and Usman had an agent in Kenya. The agent of Smith and Usman in Kenya had a habit that every time he met an official of IEBC, he would fire an email to his bosses. And normally the email would say, I met Latif, I met Janet, these people need some small chicken.
They need small chicken.
Need small chicken. Tomorrow he meets her. Another
Mariam.
team said, I met Mariam and there's so many tender committee members. We need to give them some small chicken. These were emails from the agent to his immediate supervisor in Britain. The agent and his bosses had an arrangement, a contractual arrangement, which says that if he acquires new business, he's refunded. If he's not refunded, then he's given the money. So in this,
refunded for the cost of acquiring the new business.
The cost of acquiring the new business.
Okay.
It's like a commission. Or it's not like a commission.
He was on
Or
a salary,
expenses.
but it was a very lucrative thing. He would be refunded, but he also had his own pay.
Okay.
Now, during this period that Smith and Usman was dominant in this market in the whole of Africa, there had been complaints by their competitors. And they're saying Smith and Usman is very smart in corrupting everybody. And this would be lodged by a body called Serious Fraud Office. Serious Fraud Office in Britain is not really the equivalent of Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, but for want of a better example, you can call it the counterpart.
Yeah.
UYAUCO. Unlike ours, Serious Fraud Office will investigate you for 10 years and nobody will know about it. So they had been investigating Smith and Usman for a long time. Eventually, they arrived at the conclusion that Smith and Usman was acquiring and retaining their business in Africa through corruption. So they went to Smith and Usman and confiscated their computers. When they confiscated those computers, they now found the emails that had been sent from Kenya to Britain. And they charged Smith and Usman for about 6 offenses relating to the operation in Kenya, Malawi, Ghana, and a place called Mauritania. Mauritania is a country in Africa. They're also democratic.
They are.
Yes.
we know them.
The reason why it is important for what I'm going to say next. So they are charged about 5 offenses. One of them relating to the operation in Mauritania. What happened in Mauritania, which is unique, is this. There was a general election in Mauritania. The supply of the ballot papers in Mauritania was negotiated by the minister in Mauritania who was responsible for elections. So the election was done. After the election, Smith and Usman wired some fund which was equivalent to 30% of the value of the ballot boxes supplied. The money was supplied, the money was sent direct to an account in Paris. That account was in the name of 2 young ladies. Those young ladies were the daughters of the minister. All right? So here you have money sent by Smith and Usman, sent to Paris in the minister's name, but run by his 2 daughters. So that is one of the charges. The jury concluded that of all the charges that are provided, in this particular one, Smith and Usman could not explain the reason why they had sent this money.
Yeah.
And the jury concluded any other rational explanation must be consistent with corruption. So they jailed the chairman and his managing director and whatever. The reason they were jailed was because of that.
Mauritania.
Okay. Because there was direct trail of money from Smith and Usman directly to the minister. In Kenya and elsewhere, there was nothing like that. A person also charged was the agent of Smith and Usman in Somaliland. That one was also acquitted. So the only people who were jailed were people of Smith and Usman and everybody else.
Right.
By the
In
UK
Kenya,
courts.
By the UK court. The Kenyan agent was not even called. Up to date, Serious Fraud Office has not recorded a statement from him.
Right.
Up to now.
Sorry, we're about to go on a break, but there's something there about, I see what you're driving at. There's also something there about now, responsibility ultimately, because the two officials from Smith and Usman who were jailed, like you said, not an agent, not a country representative, but a chairman and a director, or two directors, if I'm not wrong. So then here, if the investigation focuses on the person who was at the helm as well, can't fault it, right, if we're going for the top?
No, this is different. The reason why it is different, here is money that is coming from Smith and Usman and is wired direct to the minister. The minister was the one doing negotiation for the supply of ballot papers.
No, I understand that thread. I'm
In
talking about
Kenya,
from a responsibility perspective. We have to take a short break, but we'll come back and I'll let you respond.
All right.
But we'll take a short break. Hashtag is Fixing the Nation NTV. We're with Major James Oswago, former CEO of the IEBC. And of course, ask him any questions that you have. Let us know. Also call in on 0719038858. We'll be back after this.
Indeed. And James, you're explaining the chicken gate. The case is still ongoing.
Yes.
7 years later.
Yes.
It's still at the magistrate's court.
Yes.
And like you're saying, there have been editorial comments on asking, why is this case taking so long?
Why is it stalled?
And in terms of just explaining to Kenyans, this is with relation to the allegation here, the accusation is that there was kickback taken by officials of the Electoral Commission from the suppliers of electoral materials through their agents. Have I summarized it correctly?
No, you haven't.
Yeah.
That is what is in the papers.
Okay.
But what is in court, because what you expect in court, when you read the particulars of the charge, given by the narrative I've told you, this is how I'm saying I'm going to give you a counter narrative. Given by the narrative I've told you, you are expecting something like you were supposed to ask for this X number of ballot papers, but you inflated. The price was too low, but you inflated. That is not what is in court. What is in court was that there are two charges. What is in court is that on 7th of May, I wrote a letter as the CEO to Smith and Usman for them to supply ballot papers for a by-election that was done in South Mugirango in Kisii in 2010, not 2009, for the supply of 57,000 ballot papers without taking to the tender committee. Now, if we go by the narrative of Chicken Gate, the one in the papers, then you expect it to be said, you ask for 57,000 ballot papers when you should have asked for 10, for example. And that you were paid so much money and you inflated by so much. The number of registered voters in South Mugirango.
Or you asked for this, they were delivered, but you also received a kickback.
Yes.
And there's a chain here that shows money left Smith and Usman and ended up into your account.
Excellent.
Is there such a charge?
There isn't. There isn't Smith Usman sending money. I'm not the only one whose name was mentioned. There are many people whose names were mentioned in Chicken Gate. I'm the only one who is in court. And I don't begrudge that. It's your fate. But the charge that I have is that the one I've told you. it doesn't say that the ballot papers were not 57,000. And it is very easy for any Kenyan to find out what was the number of registered voters in South Mugirango by 2010. Was it more than that or it's less? Two, what was the value of those ballot boxes, ballot papers? If you add the amount of money that IEBC paid for the South Mugirango by-election, it is maximum 2 million shillings for the 57,000 ballot papers. So if it is true that this was corrupt deal, then it means that they supplied 57,000 ballot papers. They paid 2 million shillings. From that 2 million shillings, they deducted the bribes and they remained with something.
Okay.
So the case says that is not the case.
That's not the case.
Why is it taking so long, this case, in court?
Unfortunately, there are two things here. One, this case is still sub judice. And there are things I would really, really love to talk about, but I can't because they're sub judice. I don't want to break the sub judice rule.
It's
But the thing
still
that
ongoing.
it's still
just
ongoing.
For our listeners.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what Kenyans should inquire on their own is that how much really is chicken gate? Remember, I told you, I read an editorial which said if chicken gate is not resolved, it had the real potential of subverting the 2017 election. All right? So how much is it? I'm telling you, if you quantify the number of ballot papers on the charge sheet, which was 57,000, it will come maximum 2 million shillings. My own estimation is 1.6, 1.7 million shillings, which would mean, going by the narrative in the papers, the total bribe was 2 million, total quantity was 2 million shillings, from where Oswago and others were paid bribes, meaning Smith and Usman must have ended up with less than 2 million shillings.
Yeah, but sorry, carry on.
But the newspapers in Kenya are saying chicken gate is 50 million. I've had 40 million, I've had 50 million. I know for sure that that figure did not come from the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Why? When you are taken to court, they give you a file. That file contains the list of witnesses and their statements. That file contains all the documents which will be referred against you so that you know the nature of the charge you face so that you can defend yourself. So I know for a fact that the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, in the file that I have in court, has not mentioned a figure. And because they have not mentioned a figure, and this was never audited by the Public Accounts Committee, never audited by the Auditor General, I know that the figure that is mentioned in the press of 50 million
Is
I want to say fictitious.
Okay.
With respect.
Yeah. We don't have too much time left. I'm cognizant of that. Maybe the follow-up questions could be based on that, because what it presents is more about trusting the system, procurement. Now we're heading into an election. I want to take it from, we're about a year late, I think, in constituting IBC. What milestones should we have ticked off by now if we had followed due process? Because we're a year in, and it just feels like we're already too close to the elections. What milestones should have been ticked by now? How concerned are you about how behind we are in terms of the preparation ahead of the elections in 2027?
Number one, many concern. Number one, we don't have a commission. And that is a serious issue. Number two, even if you got the commission tomorrow, the commission has to do certain things. Number one, the commission has got a backlog of by-election to be done. Right. Number two, going by the requirements of Article 89 of the Constitution, the commission must do boundary delimitation. And the law says that the boundary delimitation must be completed a minimum of 12 months before the date of the next general election. If we agree, if we settle that the next general election is August 2017, and there are debates about that, but let's say it is, to me, I would say it is 2017, less 12 months, that brings you to August 2026. Oh, yeah. August 2026 from now is about 18 months. So IEBC has 18 months to do those by-elections, all of them. IEBC has 18 months to complete the process of boundary delimitation. Now, what does it take to do boundary delimitation? As Latif summarized earlier, after the disbandment of the Electoral Commission, Kenya government formed two constitutional bodies, one interim election body, one interim boundaries. The boundaries one took about 2 years to do its work. So it is a good presumption to say that boundary delimitation in Kenya on this scale will take 2 years, going by the precedence of what was done by the interim independent boundaries commission. If it is 2 years, already we don't have time. Number two, boundaries delimitation is not sitting down in a room with a sheet of paper, a ruler, a pencil,
and a map,
and a rubber. No. The Constitution at Article 29 says those things that must be done in order to do a boundary delimitation. There are factors. There are about 6 of them, which are listed in Article 89 of the Constitution. You must follow those. Now, the thing is even more difficult because if you read the judgment, that is called the BBI judgment, or the David Ndii case, if you recall. The David Ndii case is where the Handshake government tried to create 73 constituencies. And then if the constitutional amendment had gone through, they were creating 72 constituencies. And after they were created, IEBC would now do the delimitation thereafter.
Yeah.
This thing went to the High Court, to the Court of Appeal, and to the Supreme Court. If you read the judgment of the High Court, and this is relevant in this case, and I presume IEBC are cognizant of this fact, the High Court, and this opinion was also upheld by the Court of Appeal. The two courts held that, one, you can change the number of constituencies through parliamentary process, what is called the secondary constitutive power. But you cannot change the factors that you need in order to do the boundary delimitation. Those are two different things.
Is the delimitation mandatory?
It
Because
is.
we could go into the election with boundaries as they are.
You could. You can go with because already we did without that. But the Constitution provides that you do it between 8 years and 12 years. And already we did without it. But the question is...
The last was in 2012.
Yes.
Okay.
The question is, what you're asking, can you go to an election now without doing that boundary delimitation? Remember what Article 1 and 2 and 3 of the Constitution talks about. It talks about the sovereignty of the people. The Constitution, Article 89, also talks about, one of the factors is called population quota. Population quota means dividing the number of people in the country with the number of constituencies. Why is that important? It is important because the same Constitution talks about the equality of the vote. If you factor all those things and you're dealing with the sovereignty of the people, which is so critical that it is Article 1, can you then say that I'm disregarding that, proceeding ahead with figures which are almost 10, 15, 20 years late?
Yeah.
Would that still amount to representation? Are the people still sovereign?
Right.
You've lost, because Article 89(2) of the Constitution, and here it is, it says the IEBC shall review the names and boundaries of constituencies at shall.
Yes.
Operating word shall.
Yes.
Shall review at intervals of not less than 8 years
Yes.
and not more than 12 years.
Yes.
But any review shall be completed at least 12 months before a general election
Yes.
of members of parliament.
Yes. So that's what I was telling you. But as you go ahead, there, you will find it directs you.
On how to
Now
do it.
that you must do it, these are the things that you must use to do.
Yep.
But the judgment which I'm referring to, which is now law, tells you you can mess with the numbers. You can change the numbers. That's okay. What you cannot change through the normal amendment process are those factors. You must keep in those factors. Why is that important? Because if you don't follow those factors, you end up with what the Americans call gerrymandering, which means drawing constituency boundaries based on whimsical matters. So to make sure that you have equality of representation and all those things, and to avoid gerrymandering, you must follow those factors. Why is that important?
Those
because
factors are geographical features,
there are geographical
and
features,
urban centers, community interests, historical, economic, and cultural ties,
those ones,
means of communication, and so on and
those
so on.
ones. Something else, because we're talking about Shida da IBC Yakonazo. The name of this commission is Independent Elections and Boundaries Commission. It conjures, it presumes that these things are co-equal. The boundary function and the election function are co-equal, going by the name. Prima facie. But IEBC has 9 directorates, if I recall well. None of those is dedicated to boundary delimitation. And as we are speaking today, if I'm right, boundary delimitation is left to a department within the directorate, within the directorate of risk. Number one, therefore, these are not co-equal. Regular Commission said the functions of boundary delimitation and the functions of election cannot be done by one body. Should be done by different bodies. That is what they do in India. That's what they do in South Africa. But in our own wisdom as a country, we collocated all those functions in one body. Now, when you are doing it now, as we must do it now, it means you must do it in a manner that addresses the issue of sovereignty of the people, number one. Number two, in a manner that makes sure that you talk about those things that were emphasized in the David Ndii case, what is called the BBI judgment. The court, High Court and Court of Appeal thought that this thing was so important, Latif, that they came up with something called minimum structure doctrine, which means the Constitution provides how you can amend it. This one says, for you to change those factors, you need an amendment process that is extra-constitutional, that is outside what is provided for in 257. Although the Supreme Court said that that is not applicable, still the issue means to change those ones, you need a referendum. For example, if you decide tomorrow, like now, there is a judgment which nullified the census in Northeastern Province. If the census in Northeastern Province is nullified, that means you cannot have population quota. You can't. Two, if the judgment in Northeastern...
Let me understand that. The census has been nullified because that data is what would be used to then inform population quotas. So then what happens to those places during a delimitation exercise?
That is what I'm telling you, because you told me to give you the problems.
Okay.
So that is one shida, that now the census has said Northern Province, there's no census. You can't proceed without resolving that. You can't proceed with the limitation without resolving that. So what
Because
you might
you
have
need to know the population.
You must know.
So that we know
But
the
then
quota.
we're late.
You must know.
We're late.
Or if you don't do that, then you prosecute this appeal to the Supreme Court and hope that the Supreme Court will say the census that is there as of now in Mzuri. All right? If it says that,
things that take
then
time.
you can proceed. That also will take time because you cannot stampede the Supreme Court. They'll take their own time. Remember, we said we had 18 months. If you go through this entire process, you are eating into the 18 months. In other words, in summary, if the boundary delimitation is to be done within the meaning of the Constitution and paying fidelity to the judgment in the David Ndii case, you cannot do boundary delimitation by 2027.
And you cannot hold a general election without having done the boundary delimitation.
Or rather, it's
That is the
compromised.
part.
You can hold it, but it's...
That is the part.
It will be unconstitutional.
That is the part. That is the part that requires wisdom and cooler heads.
Mm-hmm.
You have the law, you have the constitution,
And you have
but you have
reality.
the nation also.
Mm-hmm.
That is what requires cooler heads. What is it that has to be done? Can we proceed for the next general election without boundary delimitation? Remember, the next general election deals with the terms of the president, because he will have served one term. Can you decide now we are not going to have it? The current president can do 10 years. You can't say that. You know? You can't say that. And the same constitution says, amongst those protected provisions, Article 255 of the constitution says you can amend anywhere. But it lists 10 areas which to amend, you need a referendum. One of those relates to the terms of service of the president. So now, if you say I delay beyond this term, then you need a referendum. All right? Now, so Kenya is between a rock and some other place.
It's not even a hard
It's
place.
not even a hard
And we have
place.
to agree
Yeah.
what is it that needs to be done so that at one, we dispense with the issue of the general election, of delimitation. My own view would be that you proceed without delimitation, but in the meantime, you sort out the issue in Northeastern Province. And two, from now onward, start a process that will ensure that boundary delimitation is done correctly. But there are other issues. I've told you that the Kriegler Commission recommended that these things should be done by two bodies.
Right. But just before you go there, should the delimitation not happen, an election is held, I'm foreseeing a court case, and one argument being that delimitation was not done.
You could say that we are going. This is something that's happening to the whole country. It was supposed to be done 2012. We didn't. So we are passing that milestone. We passed. You can say the mischief, the evil that we lived with, we can live with it another past to 2027. You can say that already we are living. Already we breached it, but we have not died. So you might say, let's breach it again. And now correct it.
But that can only be declared by a court.
Can be declared two ways. Either court in the sense of an adversarial process where somebody goes to court, or a court in the sense of advisory where somebody goes, the ethics and anti-corruption,
The IEBC.
the IEBC, or any other citizen approaches the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court says, very well, given the quagmire where we are, remember, we have a nation to preserve, and we have also something called public interest. Now, Latif, public interest ni kitu muhimu sana. You can do many things in public interest. If public interest, if in order to preserve the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and character and nature of Kenya, it is important for us to do a general election and then sort out this matter. The Supreme Court might say, because of that, forget about those things, but proceed and do general election, because the evil of not doing a general election is greater than the one of doing a general election before that thing is done. So I see us going for a general election in 2027 without the boundary delimitation. Why? I've already said. You cannot karabati boundary delimitation. You must do it in a particular manner, particularly after the David Ndii judgment.
And you can't rush it.
That's what I mean. You must do it the way it was said in David Ndii judgment. And the judgment said you don't mess with even the factors. If you don't want to consider any of those, then it says you go to
A referendum.
The High Court didn't say referendum. It says you go through an extra constitutional amending process, which means it is like you are recreating a new constitution. But the Supreme Court said, no. you can deal with that by maybe a referendum, which means still you do a referendum.
James, you've given us some good nuggets here, some good ones, and we'll keep, reaching out to you and others who have managed elections prior, so we can understand what it is that we can do to avoid other mistakes. James Oswago was a former CEO of the IEBC. In fact, let's just call him. He was the first CEO of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. He's been our guest this hour. In the next hour, we ask ourselves, what happens when doctors get it wrong? We'll be joined by the president of the Kenya Medical Association. It's 8 a.m.
Thank you, Latif.